Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Taylor, and today I'm in my truck because I want to show you guys this rough idle problem that I'm having. Hopefully by the end of the video today I'll have it solved, but it only does it at idle. It starts to fluctuate quite a bit, and it seems like the longer I sit at idle, definitely while it's in gear, it starts to fluctuate more and more. So I'm going to turn the camera over to the tack here, and hopefully you can see a little bit of this fluctuation. Now this problem goes away completely when I'm driving the truck. As soon as I give any throttle input, it clears up, cruises down the freeway fine, but at idle it does do that jumping around, and of course I'm trying to shoot a video of it and it's not doing it as dramatically as it normally does. But I've tracked it down to a couple of things. So I did the easy stuff first. I changed the fuel filters and that didn't fix it. I thought maybe there was some debris, maybe some water got in the water fuel separator, so started out with the filters and nothing changed. I ran some fuel additive through the engine. I wanted to see if maybe I had a sticking fuel injector or something like that, causing it to do that at idle, and of course that didn't fix it either. So on to the next things, and I figured it wasn't an injector, and upon looking through the Powerstroke forums and actually looking at other YouTube videos, I found that it is likely the fuel rail pressure sensor, which is located underneath the passenger side valve cover. So today we're going to be tearing that all apart. I'll give you guys a step-by-step how-to on how to address this on your truck, and hopefully that solves our problem. If you're watching this video, it definitely did, so stay tuned. Here's the part that we'll be replacing today. This is the fuel rail pressure sensor, and this is a common problem to go wrong on these trucks. And one of the other issues that these sensors have is actually the wiring harness that they connect to. Apparently, especially on the 08 models of this 6.4 Powerstroke, the harness wires will chafe together and eventually short out. So unfortunately I couldn't find a harness, a little pigtail harness locally. So we'll pull this apart and we'll just cross that bridge when we come to it. Maybe I can repair what's there if that harness is indeed bad, but we do have a new sensor to put in today. First step right now, I'm going to remove my air intake. This is an aftermarket S&B unit. So the process for this is a little bit different, I would imagine, than a factory intake. So we'll go ahead and remove this. I'm going to remove the oil fill canister and try to clear up space to get to that valve cover, which is right down here. So I'll check in with you when I have all of this stuff removed and we know what to do from there. All right, so I've got the air intake out and you can see the valve cover much more clearly here. So I am going to remove the glow plug harness, disconnect all 4 glow plugs from the connectors. I think I'm actually going to leave this oil fill tank on here that's bolted onto the valve cover and just pull it all off in one unit. So next step, I'll remove that whole harness, unbolt the transmission dipstick from the valve cover itself, and remove all of the necessary bolts for that valve cover. So I'll give you a breakdown of all of that once I'm done with that. So one quick update here, there is a bolt behind that oil fill canister. So there's 4 5/16 or 8mm bolts around it. Pull that off, and then there's a little oil line right here with a snap ring or a little spring ring. Pop that off and get it out of the way so you can get that canister off of there, and then that gives you access to the top bolt there. The next thing, which hopefully you can see, there's an electrical connection panel. You see that green connector there? There's actually a steel plate there that is bolted to the valve cover, so I am going to have to remove that bolt, and the access for that is somewhere back here by the downpipe. Hopefully you can see back here. So I'm pulling that off now, and then one other thing, when you're pulling your leads off for your glow plug connections, go ahead and put a little flathead underneath the grommet that snaps into the valve cover. Don't pull on it, you know, from the cables itself, because it'll just ruin it. So pop those out, and then those come out really easy. I'm just going to tuck these to the side because I can't get the main harness connector loose. A lot of these connectors on this truck just seem to weld themselves together after so many years, so I'm just going to leave it tucked to the side like this, and I'll clean them all up once we get the whole thing off and put back together. One more update here. This little heat sheathing goes over the glow plug relay. So to basically dig that out of there, you've got to remove this little ground strap that runs along the firewall here. That comes off with a 10 mil from this heat shield on the back of the primary turbo. And then if you can, there's these little clips, I'll show you here in a second. These little clips hold on that sheathing. So if you can get like a flathead screwdriver underneath the edges of it and pull it up, those just run down, they push down onto the threads of some studs that stick up. Once you get those out of the way, you can move your sheathing, and then you'll see this stud sticking up right here with another 10 mil on it. That 10 mil holds a back, the back tab of this glow plug relay bracket. So you'll have to remove that 10 millimeter nut on there as well to loosen up that bracket. Here's the glow plug relay and the bracket that it sits on, just so you can visualize it a little bit better. It was pretty difficult to get out. There's one bolt that runs from the little wire loom here. This piece actually bolts to that location I just showed you via this hole in the back that you see right here. And then it bolts in to basically the intake manifold right there, and then on these two pedestals on the valve cover. So that frees up our access to this bolt here at the top. And of course, Ford on that bracket stuck a bunch of these plastic connectors with these little clips that are nearly impossible to remove. So that took me quite a while trying to do it without destroying any of these wires. So we're on to the next step of hopefully removing the valve cover now. All right, guys, the valve cover is off. And when you take this off, be sure to take note about where the studded bolts are and where the regular bolts are. The studded bolts are there. This one's for the dipstick tube. This one is for some oil drain tube to the oil pan, and so on and so forth. So the first 1, 2, 3 on the front are all studded, and then the one in the middle at the bottom of the passenger side is studded. The rest are all appear to be equal length. So I'll show you the inside of the engine bay now. All right, guys, so in the engine bay again, here's the head with the valve cover removed. You can see all the injectors there. It was fairly difficult to get the valve cover out in the back, because you need to have, there's an AC line that comes out right here from the firewall, and it does get tight to this last injector in that injector tube. So kind of had to finesse it out of there. Hopefully nothing got disturbed. And then this is the item we'll be replacing right here. That is the fuel rail pressure sensor. This is the fuel rail here, obviously, inside of the the valve cover here. So you've got your injector tubes that come out, and we have the sensor we'll be replacing there. So I'll show you that in a sec. All right, this is the factory Ford sensor here that I just removed, and this is the Napa Auto Parts sensor. This thing was $45, and looking at it, it's quite a bit different. You can see here the threads on the original one seat down, and then there's a little recessed area here, almost like a spacer, and this basically is going to seat that much lower. Hopefully you can see that there. They're the same length overall, but this is just, the design is totally different. I'm going to go ahead and thread it in now and see if I have proper clearance to even use this thing. I might have to go to Ford and get a Ford replacement part instead of using the Napa part. Right here you can see the new sensor threaded in there, and despite the design of it being different than the factory sensor, it does fit and clearance everything, no big deal. The pigtail connector is clocked differently on this, and you kind of have to twist your connector to fit. The wires are a little brittle, so be gentle there, but this is all put together. So hopefully I can put this valve cover back on, and fingers crossed this fixes the problem. So when you're getting ready to put your valve cover back on, just make sure to clean up the gasket and make sure that it's seated down properly throughout the whole valve cover. Just make sure you don't get any oil leaks in the future. Then I'm going to go ahead and wipe out these holes for the glow plug leads. Little dirt got in there just from the wiring being jarred around pulling this out. So once I clean up these bores here, I'm going to go ahead and set this on there, And then also make sure to clean up the cylinder head a little bit where the gaskets to the valve cover meets it, and you should have a good seal. All right, the valve cover's back on, and I don't know if I mentioned before, I can't remember, but that's all 12mm bolts all the way around the valve cover. So I am basically just gonna start plugging things back together and bolting things down. One thing I definitely want to mention is this dipstick tube for the transmission. You kind of have to pull it out of where it seats down at the transmission a little bit to get it back onto the stud. Just really make sure that you don't pull the dipstick completely out of where it's supposed to go in the transmission, otherwise you'll start the truck and pump transmission fluid everywhere. So quick tip. All right guys, we're getting really close to being finished. I have the glow plugs and the harnesses all plugged back in. The glow plug relay with the bracket is installed up here again. I have that little ground strap back on there, and then this is just to show you how that sheathing connects to a couple of those studs sticking up. So that's all tucked in as it should be. So I'm just gonna go ahead and put the oil fill canister back on here. I'm gonna clean this surface real well since there is a gasket that mates to that. Once I do that, I'm just gonna hook up this oil drain and some last connections, and we should be ready to start this thing. Well, about 2.5 to 3 hours later, we're done. Everything is buttoned back up. Got my intake on, everything's fastened, all the electrical connections are plugged back in. Unfortunately, I just dropped one of my screws for this S&B cold air intakes down by this washer fluid bottle, so I'm gonna have to pull this whole battery tray out to find that after. But I'm gonna fire this thing up, make sure there aren't any error codes, and we'll see how it runs. Well, the truck fired up and it's running totally smooth, but it always did when it was cold, so I'm gonna let it idle here and park for maybe another 5 or 10 minutes, and then I'll take it out for a good test drive and see if we get any of that bouncy idle again, which I hope we do not. But here's the truck running, very smooth. It's one of my favorite things about this truck is that it actually is just, it's so quiet and runs so smooth. I used to have an 01 5.9 Cummins, and that was practically like driving a tractor. So this is nice and quiet, and hopefully I have my smooth idle back now. All right guys, well I just took the truck for a test drive, got it right up to operating temperature, which you can see here, and take a look at that needle on the tack. We're in park right now, and it is just dead still, no fluctuation whatsoever. And then if I drop it down into drive, where the problem was most noticeable before, it just stays dead even, right around what looks to be like 600 RPM. So I am happy to say that if you have a 6.4 Powerstroke 08 to 2010 with a rough idle intermittently, that is your fix. That was $45 at Napa Auto Parts for that little sensor that I showed you. Unfortunately, if you have a 6.4 with a rough idle and white smoke bellowing out of the tailpipe, that is a much more costly fix for that rough idle, and is certainly not what we fixed here today. But this definitely fixed our issue. We're still in drive, and the needle is very still. All right guys, that is going to do it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. I think that car almost just killed me. All right, I'm still here. If you enjoyed that video, please give it a big thumbs up for me, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more automotive content like this. And for all you 6.4 guys, let me know if this was helpful. I tried tracking down that problem for a couple of weeks before I found the solution. So it's cost effective, it's easy for your average mechanic, and it'll get your truck running well in no time. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys next video.